already. Today we are back for another episode of AI Tool Report Live. I am super stoked about doing this one. We've got Prem Kumar, who is the CEO over at HumanlyAI, which is the number one conversational platform for high volume hiring. He is in the Forbes Next 1000, a father 2 times over, ex-Microsoft, and part of the PSBJ's 40 Under 40. Welcome to the podcast, Prem.
Thanks for having me, Liam.
Awesome. I mean, I've been binging content about yourself, about Humanly, and there's like loads of stuff that we could dive into, but I think the best thing to do is get a bit more context on like who you are as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, how you got to where you are today. So I'm going to take things way back and test your memory here. I was looking back on your LinkedIn history, and I could see that your first job was as a courtesy clerk at Albertsons Companies.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about maybe that experience and kind of what you learned from it?
Yeah, no, it's that was certainly my introduction into the workforce, and haven't stopped working since. It was important for myself as well as my family to try and get into to get my first job as early as I could. As with many people, that started for me around I think I was probably like 15, 16. So at Albertsons specifically, I was bagging groceries. There's a lot of customer service element. It was a good introduction into having a schedule, showing up for others. It was kind of funny because my mom believed so much in getting us to work that my brother, who's 2 years younger, did not have a job in over the summer. He was kind of sleeping in, and I had some other commitment, and Albertsons called my house and said, "Hey, is Prem there? We need a shift. We need to cover a shift." And she said, "No, but I'm sending my other son." So she hung up, and so then my brother woke up from a nap and now had a job as well. But yeah, it was definitely a good experience. And now as we work with high volume hiring teams, I have kind of seen the other side of it, particularly in the hourly worker space. So yeah, great experience, lots of stories.
Yeah, and it seems like the genesis of kind of where you are today as well. I can kind of see across your work history, like you've got a lot of like mentorship programs where you're mentoring people at Techstars, like even Humanly, it's in the name. There's that innate kind of human candid element of speaking to people, and I really want to jump into the kind of conversational aspect of that.
Yeah.
Before we do, I just want a little bit more context on like your entrepreneurship journey. So I can see, or the first company I can see is what was called Spotago and is now Rent Match.
Yep.
You tell me a little bit about the genesis of that. Like, was that when you first decided to become an entrepreneur? Did that inspire you to go further?
Yeah, good question. So I've always, even in school and whatnot, I've always had kind of a passion for building things from 0 to 1 and the kind of entrepreneurial elements that come with that. So even later and I'll talk about Spotago and Rent Match, but even later when I joined Microsoft, I would often take entrepreneurial type jobs where it was kind of a new team. Not always, but many of my jobs there were it's almost was like working at a startup, and instead of VCs, you had VPs that you would have to pitch for budget and go out and build new things. So I always liked that part of the journey a lot. With Spotago specifically, this was right when Google Maps and some of the initial MSN products had come out, and there was a lot of folks taking data and mashing it up onto a map. And we were solving a problem for college students. I was in college at the time, and what we felt was important in making the decision to find a place to rent. One is it was a process you did with other people. You weren't searching by yourself. So can we make it collaborative? And can we add like the social landscape to the map? So it's not just about where it's located, but is it next to a restaurant, grocery store, a bar? So now everything is mapped out. That was at the time newer. So yeah, that's how we experienced the problem ourselves when we were searching for places to live, and decided to go out and start this thing. Didn't know anything about marketing or sales. We thought we could just put something on the internet and then everyone would start rushing to it. So learned a lot along the way. It was a good project, and eventually moved beyond that to Microsoft and then Tiny Pulse.
You mentioned in there that like that product was born out of you having that problem yourself, right? It's like you were struggling to find these places, thus you decided to build this.
Yep.
And it seems as if it might have been a similar thing with how Humanly was developed as well. Like you were working within Microsoft, there was a stint in kind of HR and stuff. Like, what was the genesis
Mhm.
of Humanly as well? Was that born out of this need for something that was more like kind of candidate based in the kind of recruitment process?
Yeah, no, great question. So when I was at Microsoft, about 5 of the years I was there, so I was there for 10 years, but 5 of the years I was on our HR IT team. So we'd make decisions around building technology for our workforce or buying it. So I was kind of on the buyer side to a degree of what we're selling now. So I had some experience in seeing what was out there. But I also had a lot of like candidate experiences. So when I was a high volume hire myself, and what I mean by that is jobs that are getting lots and lots of applicants. These like entry level jobs. When I was graduating from college, yeah, I would send tons and tons of resumes out and not hear anything back. You know, I'd keep refreshing my Gmail to see if I heard anything back, and being ignored a lot. And then when I did do interviews, so we would have companies come to campus, I would compare notes with my colleagues, and they were getting completely different questions for the same job, they had the same degree as me. And it just seemed like a process where lots of folks were getting ignored at the beginning. And then the interviews were kind of haphazard and unstructured. So what that so that a lot of that was the genesis for Humanly. We kind of feel that all candidates deserve a touch and an outcome for every candidate, and we know that recruiters aren't ignoring on purpose. They just don't have the human time to engage with everyone at scale. So can we give you tools to talk to every candidate, but from an automation standpoint, but then spend human time with the ones that are the best fits. And a couple other quick things there is we also realized, because I like literally remember like the feeling I had when nothing against Google, but when I was rejected for the job there. I and that's something you don't really forget. And what we're seeing is like bad candidate experience. Virgin Media did a study saying they lose $6 million a year because candidates that have a bad experience will go out and go to a competitor. So can we allow that touch at scale, and then make sure that humans can spend their time on the folks that are the best fit for this role right there?
Well, I mean, something that comes to mind is the fact that you're blending this kind of like human touch to it, right? Like these kind of candid conversations, being able to kind of treat everyone with equal respect and equity and honesty, but you're also overlaying this with automation and AI. So, like, I guess my question for you is, how do you balance
Yeah.
the automation with the human element in recruiting?
Yeah, really good question. So, and this changes for different types of hiring. So, for executive hiring or more senior hiring specialist roles, there are some differences, but generally for these higher volume and entry to mid level roles, the past was it wasn't a choice between talking to a chatbot or talking to a human. It was kind of a choice between either being ignored or waiting a week or talking to a piece of technology. So can we fill that void? Can we also make
Right.
this less about screening candidates out, and make it more about screening them in and answering their questions? So what we find is if we talk to everyone, answer their questions via chat, via our chatbot, which can be delivered on the web or SMS, but if we have that first touch, the candidates also learn more about the company, and the highly qualified ones will stay. The ones that might have dropped out later when they got answers to their questions will leave. And then can we also, for the ones that are a good fit, get them to the right person faster? So I think if anything, it's kind of getting the strong ones human time faster, and then giving everyone else some sort of outcome. Maybe it's the chat recommends them a different job, or maybe we keep in touch for later. And then the last piece I'll say is You also kind of want you're not just with these companies, not just filling one role right now. You kind of want to build a pipeline for the future. So can you keep in touch and build a longer relationship with candidates through automation, which to me does make it more human. But it's a really good point. We're definitely blending something that isn't thought of as human like. But yeah, I think this provides us an opportunity to be human through technology.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems obvious, right? Like people are treated with respect, given the time to actually have a conversation, and not just ignored for a week. That you generally have more positive outcomes. It seems as if something that was obvious there for a while, but no one was actually working with. What I'm really curious about, I could see from your advisory board, you have a behavioral scientist, right? And they're there to advise in the development of the product. Is there maybe anything that surprised you in terms of human behavior that you've noticed in the development of Humanly as a platform? Something that didn't initially come to mind, but has actually come to light as you've continued to develop?
Yeah, well, one interesting thing is just the importance of expectation setting with candidates. So we were measuring sentiment, and we were measuring candidate satisfaction, and the ones that had some of the ones that had the best experience didn't even get the job. So we always assume that, hey, we're delivering bad news, they're going to take it badly. But the more we can set expectations and give them updates, and if they don't get the job, can you provide them with maybe links to other places to check out? That goes a really, really long way. And so that was one learning. Another learning is, the to your other point, or the other question, we weren't sure at the beginning if candidates wanted to talk to a chatbot or an automated piece of technology. But now we have a rating from candidates of about 4.8 out of 5. And I think that the main part of that is, if the technology is actually solving their problem, getting them to the next step, or directing them to a new next step, they will generally rate it very high. And I think with some of the chat bots of old, is they were more about chatting and less about transacting. So I do think, while it's called a chat bot, the primary purpose shouldn't just be a kind of chatty experience. It should be, can we convert you to the next step? So that was one learning. I think another quick one is just where I feel that very much certainly AI is not here to like replace recruiters by any means, but I have seen, particularly to the last like 2 to 3 years, recruiters and recruiting teams using AI may replace those who don't. And what has been a little surprising is just not so much just how fast this like LLM explosion has happened and AI has exploded, but how smart and how fast our buyers and customers are at learning it. And so that has been, I guess I shouldn't say a surprise, but definitely been impressive, how quick the buyers are jumping on this and asking the right questions. So that's a really good thing.
With those buyers specifically, you'd mentioned the Virgin Media study was like $6 million in kind of lost revenue and stuff.
Yep.
When you're kind of like pitching Humanly to maybe a recruiting or HR firm, like what are the kind of benefits that you would outline to them aside from the kind of like applicant satisfaction?
Yeah, it's very much time savings and money savings. So that can be measured via time to hire, is generally what we would do. And then some of the other benefits, like you mentioned, we can measure candidate experience. So one example, we have a customer here in Seattle. So in their case, they're getting about 4,000 candidates in a 2-month period. This is for university hiring. So when they're doing university hiring, they're getting lots of candidates in that period. So in the past, they just had the human time to talk to about 10% of them, but the 10% had to wait a week. So what we can do is say we'll talk to everyone within 24 hours. So the good ones don't have to wait a week, and the ones that aren't a fit aren't ignored. And what that also does is that, from a time to hire standpoint, next time they have a job, we already have talked to so many people that we might have folks that the technology is kept in touch with, that are on deck, and ready to go. So time savings, but really, can we measure that from a cost saving standpoint? Can we give you back money and hours in the day around these very repetitive tasks as it relates to sourcing, screening, scheduling? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems a bit of a no-brainer if you're kind of deeply entrenched in the industry. On a more technical side of things, I've got a bit of a two-parter question for you. One, are you guys running on some sort of proprietary AI? Are you running via an API for this? And then two, how do you kind of factor in potential biases that are within that
Yep.
AI or LLM, especially with like DEI inclusion, stuff like that? Like, how do you kind of factor all that into the process?
Yeah, really good question. So I'll start by saying that, I really feel like this AI revolution is one of choice, and we want to give that choice back to our customers. Where, when SaaS came out, instead of just buying a product, you're now buying into a journey. Now with generative AI, the customers are kind of part of that journey. So we want to give them choice based on what their goals are. Is it quality? Is it cost? So what our infrastructure looks like is, we will plug into LLMs like Azure, OpenAI, but first off, we don't have to. So we have basically infrastructure that's based on some of these LLMs that are out there, and then we have our own proprietary layer on top. And some of the ways that works is, we're adding guardrails. So if it's a candidate in Colorado that's asking, what is the pay, we would know, the LLM wouldn't, but we would know, hey, there's certain pay transparency laws in Colorado. This is a Colorado candidate. We need to answer the question like this. So generally what happens when you talk to our chatbot is the first line of answers to questions come from come from our customers in a curated way. The next line might be links they've given us to their employee handbook, their career page. If it's a question it doesn't fall in those categories and is more random, like why is the sky blue, then we might go to an LM. So I guess the answer is both. But when I mentioned the choice thing, in a given conversation with a chatbot, we might be plugging into 3 different LLMs and our own homegrown tools. So we're running multiple models at the same time, which it can be expensive, but at this, we're working with a third party consultant to help us get there. But what that allows us to do is, if a customer really cares about quality of answer, we can go. It might be a little more expensive, but we can go to the LLMs for those questions. Maybe for pay questions, quality matters a lot, but maybe for another more generic question, quality doesn't matter as much. So we give the power to our customers to make those decisions. On the DEIB piece, so one thing I think is really important is, similarly to how you get an ISO audit or a SOC 2 audit as you're thinking about your processes and data security. So we have an AI audit that's done by a company called Fair Now. We do this regularly, but we can also do it on demand for our customers. So it will measure, are there biases in the models? Maybe we're getting our answers for a chatbot from your career page, and we notice some biased language there that's ageist. Or so there are measures, and our governance around how we build this thing is audited by a third party, which I think every buyer should ask their vendors to do that.
Got you. I mean, it's an amazing kind of standard to live by, and it's something that I can see kind of evident that you guys are constantly winning awards for this as well, and you kind of tout the inclusivity on your website as well. What I'm kind of wondering about, like, obviously you're doing a lot of this on the product side of things, but I'm wondering how the company as a whole has been shaped, and if any part of developing the product has actually changed how you kind of I guess how you shape your company internally too.
Yeah, no, really good question. So we've had goals since day one around the diversity of the team, and that can be anywhere from diversity in thinking to gender to. So we've definitely tried to build a team that's coming from different walks of life in different areas, and can bring different ways of thinking to how we make decisions. So we have our goals around that. We also work with a third party called Strata. So they're a DEIB consultant. So which isn't always as common at our stage, but it was important to us. So we do that to, change kind of the operating system for how we work, how we make decisions, how we do meetings. We might have rules like for certain activities we're doing, we want like some of our teams remote, some of it's in person, but for some types of meetings, we don't want to create inequity. So we might say, hey, even if you're in person, just grab a conference room and dial in. So everyone is on Zoom, versus some people kind of having side conversations in person and whatnot. So I think there's things we've done in our culture to promote that. There's some people at a company that are really good at written communication, but not always as great or comfortable in public verbal communication. So how do we use things like Slack and Slab and documentation to allow their voices to be heard? And then I'll even do so. I'll have our tool join my interviews that I do, and it'll measure me on, am I speaking too quickly, which seems like a simple thing, but if the candidate, if English was a second language and I'm talking over 150 words per minute, it could disadvantage a candidate. So I think we're also using our tools to see if we can get better at how we're having conversations with job candidates.
Mm. With that, you kind of demonstrated how this culture is created, like the guardrails and stuff you have to kind of keep that in check and make sure everyone's equally supported. You started in 2019, from what I understand, with two other co-founders. How hard has it been to maintain that culture of inclusivity as you scale? And like, what other parts are important about culture to include as you kind of start to grow the company?
Yeah, no, well, first off, yeah, it certainly has been hard. It's so I was coming from a company called Tiny Pulse, and the product we sold was to help companies improve their culture, and it was an employee engagement tool. But so I kind of just thought I would know what I'm doing, but lots of learning over the last several years, particularly like you said, as the company's growing. You kind of need to have a culture roadmap. You kind of have, just like a product, you have to add new features. You have to listen to your customers. Our customers for our culture are our employees or past employees or new employees, right? So there's a lot of like iteration and learning. There's many new things, whether it's formal like a 401k or extended benefits program, whether it's how we run meetings and what our meeting culture looks like. So there's lots of things that have changed. So I guess like how we did that is listening, and provide, whether it's surveys or whether it's when we did our recent acquisition, I had one-on-ones with everyone at the company to get their perspective on it. So I think those sort of things and being okay with upgrading and iterating and changing, because you can't, just like in the past, with software, you install it once, but you can't just install a culture. It needs to be more like SaaS software where you're upgrading it constantly. So that's been a big thing for us. And I think if we're ever perfect, then we're not moving fast enough. So we're going to have to just constantly be iterating.
Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of idea of being an eternal student, right? Being open to listening, learning new ideas, and continue to create and change. With that, you were named the 2023 Startup CEO of the Year. What does it take to be a great CEO? What are the main things you've learned over the past however many years in your career?
Yeah, good question. And I've had the benefit of talking to a lot of other CEOs and several I admire. So I've formed some thoughts in addition to my personal experience. I mean, I think one is just being really passionate about the problem space. Investors are investing in a big problem space that you're going to solve and sell into that attainable market over time. It doesn't mean you have to have a ton of experience in that problem space, but I think as you're going through, you really, really need to feel that, hey, there is no reason why this problem should exist. We need to eradicate it by any means. So I think having that passion will inform customer discovery. It'll inform how you talk to your investors, how you talk to your team, and they'll notice and see that. So you have to really, really care about the problem. And again, that doesn't mean you have had to have been experiencing that problem your whole life. That can definitely help, but it doesn't mean you have to be coming from that industry necessarily. That's one thing. I think, kind of like I'll often kind of test myself when I'm signing up for things and making decisions. In the past, I might ask myself, will I regret doing this? But I think you have to say, will you regret not doing it, and kind of flip it that way where your the default is you're going to do something and taking action. I think the more, I guess, to make it more specific, how you manage experimentation is really important because you have finite resources, but you have to figure out those pockets of things that are going to make you successful, product market fit wise, or even GTM wise. So being okay with being uncomfortable and just going and doing these experiments, as long as you're measuring them, I think is another trait. You have to also just be okay with chaos and just learn to accept it. Every day will be different. Like this morning when I was a few minutes late because we had something I was dealing with. I think if you let each one of those moments like stress you the heck out, it's not going to be very sustainable. So just assuming that the default will be a level of chaos.
With all that being said, I want to ask you a bit of an uncomfortable question because I think it's really hard for people to kind of like self-evaluate. One, what is it you think about your personality that makes you a great CEO?
Mm-hmm.
And two, what do you think people admire about you?
Yeah, no. So I think personality wise, and it is to some degree a blessing and a curse because this also has come up on my performance reviews as not a good thing when I was at bigger companies. So I think one is I'm very much well, I guess a couple parts of this is I'm always trying to like do more and push from a creativity standpoint. So can we do things in a different way? Like why does it have to be this way? So that's been one like personality trait. The other that came along with that is I very much will sign up for a lot of things. And the number one, like, everyone, which I agree with, prioritization, focus is extremely important with little resources. But I kind of feel that part of my personality is to, within the scope of focus, to thread the needle and try out and be exposed to as many things as possible. And the last thing is I will often get that I'm too nice. And to me, like, being empathetic and kind is not counter to productivity. I think it can be. I think sometimes I'm also very much a person who doesn't like to like shout in a room because I happen to think something. I want to go back and get the data and do the research. And I think in the past, in corporate America, the loudest voices won, and the person who was most quickly able to get to a convicted opinion and verbalize it won the room. So that is not my personality, and that in some ways has hurt me. But I very much find it to be a strength as a CEO now. And then your other question around what people would say. Luckily, we do like 360 feedback, and so I don't have to make it up. But I guess I could say what I've heard. Yeah, if people find me to be supportive, I feel. I think the other piece is like really being passionate about this problem space. Like I mentioned before, I do think as I talk to buyers, like I like know how painful their days are sometimes when they're manually looking through 100 resumes, and it doesn't feel good for them to ignore candidates, right? They don't want to be doing that. So how can we help? So that's one thing people might say about me, that I care a lot about the problem.
Awesome. I appreciate you answering that one. It's never an easy one for people to answer and self-evaluate. So thank you for sharing that. With all this being said, there's obviously a kind of a technical degree of like expertise that it takes to be a great CEO. How has maybe your approach changed on an organizational level from your experiences at Techstars, at your previous jobs at Microsoft, and to Humanly? What's like maybe the biggest three factors you've taken forward to be an effective CEO?
Yeah, and I do agree that there's particularly in these spaces the technical piece. I think technical curiosity is really important to me, and that's something I've developed over time. And then how do you stanch that curiosity via learning. I think like, and what I mean by that, I guess, is the technology, especially in our like ML and AI world, things are moving so quickly. You need to really keep not just a lens, not just have a perspective on what's happening now, but what you think might happen later. So you can't just rely on analyst predictions and other companies. I think if we were looking at other HR recruiting tech companies for inspiration, we'd be like 3-4 years behind, right? We should be looking at these sales and marketing tools. So I think keeping an eye to what's happening from an innovation standpoint is something that's even more important now than it once was. And what's been important for us, and I've learned this through the experiences you mentioned, is sometimes in this world it's rapidly changing, knowing what not to build is almost as important or more important than knowing what to build. So having a strong stance on what might become commoditized, what OpenAI might do in 2 years and 3 years, and then building what you think is going to be very valuable in that future world. Otherwise you're just going to get leapfrog. So I think that is something that I've developed over time, and that technical curiosity and really having an opinion on what we should not be building because of where things are going. So those are some of the things.
Building on those 2 points, looking at the AI space in general, as well as Humanly as a company, what are your predictions for the future in terms of trends in AI, and where do you see Humanly in 3, 5, 10 years time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the infrastructure layer and what you can build on top of is getting bigger and bigger in a good way. Some of our earlier competitors building recruiting chatbots, it was almost like building a SaaS company before AWS. They were like building the cloud, the infrastructure, and then the app on top of it. So some of the basic things that makes a chatbot good at talking to a human, I think are commoditized or are becoming commoditized quickly. But what makes it good at actually recruiting and having a recruiting conversation are not. And then that's where vendors like us can come in, regardless of industry. So I do think the vertical specialization and the data that these SaaS startups and companies can bring is going to be really important. But I do see the commoditized piece continuing to be the infrastructure around getting humans to be able to talk to a computer via a chatbot, or synthesizing documents, summarization. I was on a panel yesterday with one of the leaders at Microsoft Teams, and with a lot of the bets they were making, they really wanted to ship a product, and there were some things that they knew were imperfect, but they said, we think this thing is going to be developed by someone else in a year. This thing's probably going to be here in 2 years. So let's not worry about that right now. Let's go to market with this set of things. So, but yeah, those are some of the things. I think that more like the infrastructure stuff around some of the areas like sentiment analysis. For example, you might have a sentiment model that can measure based on a transcript, did the candidate have a positive interview? But that part can be commoditized. But what a company like us can do is add the context around, yeah, maybe sentiment was bad, but that's because that you were at the part of the interview where you were talking about pay and maybe something about that context. So I think the context and data that startups can bring will give them IP, but some of the infrastructure will be commoditized.
Mm. And what about Humanly as well? What's the North Star, the vision for you, your team?
Yep. Yeah, I guess as a company or like technologically or both.
Both.
Yeah, yeah. So so right now in our space, and we're generally selling to mid-sized companies of about 500 to 5,000 customers, or sorry, employees. Then we also have enterprise at 5,000 and beyond. But generally, with what we're trying to do, so they'll most likely have an applicant tracking system like a Greenhouse, a Lever, an iCIMS, UKG, Ceridian, Dayforce. They might have actually, I'll start with this. So we first looked at what happened with sales and marketing. You had Salesforce and CRMs. Those CRMs weren't good enough at engaging with candidates. They were with prospects. They were good at storing data and reporting and processing through the funnel, but they weren't good enough at engaging. So then tools like Outreach came out. then the outreaches of the world weren't necessarily good enough at having these two-way conversations with prospects. So then the gongs came out, maybe a drift came out, conversational marketing happened. So that same thing has happened in recruiting. You have like a system of record. They weren't great enough at engaging with candidates. So you have CRMs, like a Beamery. And then those weren't good enough at the two-way conversations with candidates. So that's where we come into play. But what I see happening and what our vision is, I think eventually there will be a world where there is probably less than three. So what we want to do is partner very closely with CRMs. We have some CRM functionality ourselves. I think people are only going to need two tools, maybe an ATS and something like us combined with a CRM. In the future, maybe just one. So what I want us to do is anytime there is any two-way conversation with a job candidate, whether it's on email, SMS, chatbot, or human to human, I want us to be there making it more efficient and more equitable. And then for now, I want us to partner with the downstream systems for some of those other use cases.
Wow. I mean, it really is a grand vision. And to give you context, we've been writing AI tool report for the past 18 months, covering AI in the daily, covering different tools that are coming out. And we've really experienced kind of what you're saying as well, like the same period of consolidation. As we started out with maybe 100,000 tools that did very specific niche use cases, and it's just consolidated every 6 months or so into one that has more functionality. So it's absolutely kind of in line with what we're seeing as well, being kind of deep in the weeds of reviewing a different AI tool every single day. With this, you've been running this for 5 years now. You've obviously got a grand vision for the future. What keeps you motivated to keep doing this day on day on day on day and continue this into the future? What keeps you going?
Yeah, my coworkers and customers are probably the two things. So, the people I'm engaging with, and like it's good to get kind of like a when I talk about the problem statement and the pain that our buyers see. When you like hear that firsthand, it's almost like getting a shot of energy. Um, you realize what it kind of brings you back to why you're doing this. And so I think the things that really keep me going are like the impact to customers. So when we can measure the candidate experience being a 4.8, or when we can measure that money savings, those are two things that really keep me going.
Got you. And how do you maintain? I mean, something I love that you mentioned it in your LinkedIn that you're a two times father. How do you maintain that work life balance as a CEO of a massive tech company and having a home life and everything else?
Yeah, no, it's a good question for sure. So yeah, my kids are 9 and 5, so fairly young. When I first started Humanly, yeah, my 5-year-old was just born. I think one thing that it has also helped me do is structure my day in a much more effective way, in the sense that I generally will try and end at a certain time. So I'll try and be home at about 6, and because I have that deadline, it like forces me to get the most important things done at a certain period of time, by a certain period of time. So I think I've added a lot more structure and tried to become more intentional with how I spend my time. It has caused me to, while I'm naturally a person who signs up for a lot of things, someone who's had to say no a lot more. So that's been a big thing for me. I think it also, when you ask like what keeps you going, I think that's also a reminder when I hang out with my kids, and like I want them to see that I followed a path that I was passionate about, and was able to help with my team solve problems for people in the world. So that is also another piece. But yeah, it has, and I wasn't always good at the time management stuff by no means. So I think it's forced me to be more planful there.
Yeah, I can imagine that this kind of experience over time has led you to kind of the structure that you currently have. And something you mentioned earlier on that I just kind of want to touch on to just finish off this, as you mentioned mentors and influences, right? And that's obviously a big part about what you do at Techstars, stuff like that. Can I ask maybe who your greatest mentor or influence has been? And then sequentially downstream from that, if you were to give advice to someone else that was maybe just starting an AI business, what would you
Yep.
tell them?
Yeah, I'll list a couple quick ones, but yeah, no, our investors have always been great. So we have Chris Olson on our board, who's been a great mentor. In HR tech, one of the people that helped me early was she's an advisor, Lisa Brummel. She used to be a CHRO at Microsoft, and then I have a great peer network of friends that that I consider that mentorship. I've done some reverse mentoring programs too, where maybe I'm mentoring someone more senior than me, and or vice versa. So yeah, mentorship has been key, and lots of great folks. Another guy, Kabir Shahani, he was formerly CEO of a company called Imparity here in Seattle. So keeping like a network, I guess, of mentors versus like feeling like it has to be one person has been great for me. As far as sorry, what was the second part of the question?
I mean, just actually, I do want to ask the second part, but you've just posed another question in my mind from that first part. This, I guess, how important is it to be conscious about finding mentorship? Like, do you remember your first mentor? Did you reach out to them and ask them to mentor you, or did it happen more organically?
Yeah, good question. Generally, organically, when I was at Microsoft, there was a formal mentor program, so I utilized that as well. But some of the longest lasting relationships have been organic, and I think I encourage mentees to don't feel like you have to go out and say, "Will you be my mentor?" Sometimes it might. I would start with, can I have one meeting because this is a specific problem I'm grappling with, and oftentimes I've seen them start that way. So asking someone for a specific bit of help, and then maybe there'll be a connection there. So yeah, that's generally how I've seen things happen. But there's certainly a time and a place for more formal as well.
Yeah, I guess it makes more sense if it is organic, you naturally have some sort of connection and some sort of relationship. The second part of my question was just to kind of round off the interview. If you were to maybe give some advice to someone that was looking to enter the AI space, start a tech company of their own, what would be some advice that you would give them?
Yeah, the first advice, and I have this as advice because I didn't take it myself, and I wish I did, but it's really like just get started. Like there's so much like analysis paralysis and things holding me back from taking that next step. There's a metaphor, I think it's called like it's something to do with elephants, but the way the metaphor goes is elephants in Asia in back in history were tied down as babies, and then when they got bigger, they were it's called the elephant rope. They were easily big enough to break the rope, but they were like psychologically just so used to being tied that they didn't just break the rope and leave. And I think there's lots of those ropes for us. When I was at Microsoft, it was, and I love my time there, but when I wanted to leave, it was like, oh, maybe I should wait 3 months. Maybe I should wait for my stock to vest. Maybe I should wait for until I figured out benefits. So I think there's always going to be things holding you back. So my number one advice is just go out and do it tomorrow.
Awesome. Words to live by. I want to thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're obviously incredibly busy, so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. If people maybe want to get in touch with you or the people at Humanly, like how would they reach you guys?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Also, find to take emails at prem@humanly.io. Those would be the two best ways.
Yeah. Can I ask how insanely busy is your inbox from all these messages?
It is very busy. I do have help. So a shout out to my amazing EA Jacqueline. But yeah, no, it's yeah. Let me check. So I actually it's much cleaner now. But yeah, I've oftentimes I'm just bombarded with hundreds and hundreds of messages as we all are now.
Yeah, I noticed that on your website as well. There is your email that's connected too,
Yeah,
so people can message you
yeah.
directly. I'm glad you've got help with it. But again, Prem, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciated it. And I hope everyone gets as much value out of this episode as I did.
Thanks, Liam. I appreciate your time.